Well, welcome, friends. My name is Alan Ewing-Merrill. I serve as the Executive Director of the BTS Center, which is a private foundation located in Portland, Maine, building on the legacy of the former Bangor Theological Seminary. Guided by the vision of human hearts renewed, justice established, and creation restored, the BTS Center seeks to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. And we do that by offering theologically grounded programs of continuing education and spiritual vocational formation, workshops and retreats, learning cohorts, public conversations, and projects of applied research. Today, we're so glad to welcome you to this event, a Fireside Chat with Rabbi Yonatan Neril, whom I will introduce in just a moment. First, I'm grateful to be joined by two of my colleagues. I'd like to introduce Ash Temin, who serves as communications manager here at the BTS Center. Go ahead and wave, Ash. As well as Aram Mitchell, who serves as our Director of Partnerships and Formation. Hi, Aram. Between the two of them, they are going to manage the chat and the comments. They're going to make sure the event is recorded and streamed to Facebook Live, wrangle technology, troubleshoot, and take care of any details that might come up as we're sharing in our chat to make sure everything goes smoothly. It is a team effort around here. So thanks for being here, Aram and Ash. On behalf of all of us who are part of the BTS Center team, I want to welcome you to this gathering. It's great to see all of you here in the Zoom room. Some of you are familiar faces. So welcome to those of you who regularly take part in programs of the BTS Center. It's also a joy to see some new faces as well. So welcome especially to those of you who may be joining us for the first time today. We also want to just offer a quick shout out to those of you who may have stumbled upon this live stream on Facebook Live. We're really glad that you are with us today as well. I'm going to invite Ash now to unmute and say hello, and she's going to lead us in a round of introductions.
Yes, welcome everyone. It's so lovely to have you here from across a lot of different time zones, I think. And I just want to invite you in this time of gathering to drop a couple of things in the chat so we can get to know each other a little bit better briefly. If you would just say where you're tuning in from, where in Maine or New England or the United States or the world that you're coming from, and maybe include something that you can see from where you're sitting or standing that is delightful to you, whether it's something that you're looking at through the window or something in the room where you are, something that's just bringing you a little bit of joy this day. So if you want to drop that in the chat right now, that would be lovely. We have someone coming from Freeport, Maine, someone from Buffalo, New York, seeing a red-tailed hawk flying, the Harikisset River, pictures of family, views of the ocean, wind vigorously blowing in a lot of places today, including here in Portland, Baton Rouge, where there are evergreen trees, someone with a newly finished needlepoint pillow you did during COVID. I love that. And first daffodils in Oklahoma. I'm going to try not to be too jealous of that. I think we're a ways away from it here in Maine. A nuthatch and an oak. Someone from Chicago looking at a duck sculpture. All sorts of lovely things that you're seeing. Well, thank you. It's really wonderful to have you all here. I know that I am looking forward to this rich conversation. So we'll turn it back over to you, Alan.
Thank you so much, Ash. And again, welcome to all of you who are joining us here today. Now I'm delighted to introduce our guest, my conversation partner for this fireside chat, Rabbi Yonatan Neril, who's joining us today from Jerusalem, where it is now 7:24 in the evening. Am I right? The sun
Yes, you
has
are
set.
right.
Okay. Well, I am sitting here fireside, Yonatan, because here in Maine it is 36 degrees and very windy, and the fire feels welcome. But I have a feeling it may be a little bit warmer in Jerusalem. Am I right?
It is indeed. It is transitioning to spring here already.
Yeah. Well, spring comes late to Maine, as you may know. Um, so wonderful to have you with us. And let me just take a moment to introduce our guests, and then we'll jump into this conversation. Rabbi Neril serves as the founding director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development based in Jerusalem. And Aram has just put a link to that website in the chat. Raised in California and a graduate of Stanford University with a focus on global environmental issues, Rabbi Neril received rabbinical ordination in Israel. He is the co-author of the best-selling book Eco Bible. I hope we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about this today. Published in 2 volumes, which shines new light on how the Hebrew Bible and great religious thinkers have urged responsible and faithful relationship with the natural world for thousands of years as a central message of spiritual wisdom. Yonatan has spoken internationally on religion and the environment, including at the United Nations Environment Assembly in Nairobi, the Fez Climate Conscious Summit, and the Parliament of World Religions. He's organized numerous interfaith environmental conferences in various parts of the world, and he writes and teaches frequently on Jewish environmental ethics and the connection between faith and ecology, which is our topic for today. He lives with his wife, Shana, and their 2 children in Jerusalem. So Yonatan, welcome, my friend. So glad to have you with us.
Good to be here with you. Thank you, Alan, Reverend Alan.
Yeah. Thanks so much for saying yes to this invitation. We met for the first time just last month, and I knew immediately that you were someone I wanted to share one of these fireside chats with. I think I proposed it about 10 minutes into our meeting, actually. So thanks for being here today. I wonder if you might start out just by sharing a little bit about your journey, about how you came to this work, this kind of ministry, and about the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, which you founded and lead.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I grew up in California on an acre of land with an organic garden that I gardened with my mother. I grew up going to a Jewish summer camp near Yosemite, where I first learned about the connection between Judaism and ecology. And that was, I also grew up on land that Native Americans, the Acalanes people lived on about 100 years before my family arrived, and with an old growth oak tree that the Native Americans likely harvested. And on the summer camp I went to, there was a sweat lodge. So I sort of grew up with a bit of a fusion between Jewish spirituality and some Native American practices. And I came to Israel about 18 years ago, and I've lived here since, and did my rabbinic training here, and about 12 years ago started the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development.
Thank you. Well, looking forward to hearing more about that. You often talk about the ecological crisis as a religious and spiritual crisis. So I want to just read a couple words from the introduction of Eco Bible, and then invite you to share a little bit more about this. You say, at this moment in history, we need a major infusion of energy specifically to help faith groups inspire behavioral change for sustainable living. You go on to say, we offer this book to accelerate the awakening religious and spiritual process so humanity can keep moving fast enough to avert irreversible environmental deterioration of our only home. The environmental movement has failed to effect transformational change in the past 50 years, partly because fear of the darkness of ecological collapse has driven the movement. The light of spirituality can spark a more hopeful approach with deeper and broader effect. I really love that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you think about this and why voices of faith are so important in conversations about ecology and about the climate crisis.
Sure. So I understand the ecological crisis to be a spiritual crisis. It's not just about the birds and the bees or the trees and the toads. It's about how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And so any approach that doesn't acknowledge the spiritual implications of the ecological crisis and the spiritual roots of it, I think is going to fall short. I believe the crisis is about short-term thinking, instant self-gratification, and arrogance. And the spiritual solutions to those issues are long-term thinking, caring for other people and creatures, and humility.
Can you say those again? I love that. Short-term
Sure.
thinking, say those again.
Short-term thinking, instant self-gratification, and arrogance, I consider some of the spiritual roots of the ecological crisis.
Yeah.
And long-term thinking, delayed gratification, and humility, I consider spiritual solutions.
Yeah, that resonates so much with the concepts that we're exploring here through the BTS Center. I often quote this environmentalist Gus Speth, and I'm sure anyone who's heard me speak before can probably almost recite this with me because I talk about it so often. But he's this environmentalist who was the dean of Yale School of Forestry and founder of several environmental movements over the years. And he talks about how he used to think that the top environmental problems were, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, climate change. And he thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those. But of course, we've had much more than 30 years of good science, and we're not in a better place at all. So he now says that the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy, which so connects with what I just heard you say. And to deal with these, he says we actually need spiritual and cultural transformation, which I always find it's fascinating to hear someone who's not, I don't know his faith tradition or practice, but he's not a faith leader, he's not a theologian, but to hear someone, from kind of a secular field acknowledge that what we need is spiritual and cultural transformation. And he ends by saying, and we scientists don't know how to do that. So it's kind of on us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and that's an important perspective. I mean, just last week, the UN IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, issued another report that is more dire than the previous reports. They happened to issue it during the war in Ukraine, so it was overshadowed by that. But it's not as if with each new report that humanity all of a sudden, drops everything and says, wow, we need to figure out how the next generation is going to inherit a thriving, spiritually aware and livable planet. Since 1988, nations of the world have been negotiating on climate change. That was when the Framework Convention on Climate Change began. First, after that, it was in Rio in '92. And every year the nations of the world and the political leaders get together, the emissions of greenhouse gas emissions go up. And how could that be that every year that humanity tries to address this issue, the problem actually gets worse? And I think it relates to religion sort of being on the sidelines. That I think that there's sort of a tacit agreement between religion and consumer society, that religion will sort of do its thing and it will focus on ritual and homiletics and liturgy, and etc. But the driving force within human society will be materialism and consumerism. And as long as that happens, climate change will increase, plastic pollution will increase, biodiversity loss will increase. So that's again why I think that really, bringing religion to bear on the ecological crisis is going to be our saving grace for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some ways, materialism and consumerism have become a kind of secular religion, right? To displace the great religious traditions and adopt this other one that is really rooted in, as you say, short-term thinking, immediate gratification, the eternal quest for more and bigger and better, right? Isn't that a kind of secular religion?
Yeah, and it's I've sort of been struck by, just in the past couple of weeks, with the war in Ukraine and this focus of humanity on or on at least of the West, on the Russian oligarchs. I read today that the oligarchs in Russia control about 40% of the country's wealth, about $1 trillion. And it just sort of, one person called it mafia capitalism. But it exposes, it's not just in Russia, it's in many countries in the world of where, there's the ultra rich and people with, yachts and private airplanes. And then there's the rich who are also consuming at a higher level. And there's the middle class who's actually consuming at a standard of living that, kings and queens consumed at in the past. And altogether, 8 billion people on the planet, we are causing global changes that we need to, take seriously.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought in what's happening in Ukraine, because I have a feeling most of us who are gathering in this Zoom room are carrying kind of an undercurrent of sorrow and some fear and probably some anger as we witness what's happening there, especially following President Vladimir Putin's announcement a week ago that he'd ordered Russian nuclear forces to be on high alert. And of course, we know that that's the conflict that is most in the headlines right now. And as you say, it's kind of displacing some other things that are equally urgent and pressing. But of course, there's violence and suffering and injustice in so many places around the world, including there in Israel and here in the United States, and so many places that aren't necessarily in the headlines right now. Especially I think about places where Black and brown people are exploited and targeted every day. So I wonder how you're living with all of this. Where is your head and your heart right now as you're watching what's happening and thinking about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as Reverend Bullet Jonas mentioned in the chat, there's definitely a connection between the war in Ukraine and oil and gas. I don't think this war would be happening if Russia weren't producing 10% of the world's oil and supplying, I think, 40% of gas to Europe. So, this is sort of the dark underbelly of our addiction to fossil fuels. This is one more way that it manifests. And, scholars talk about petrostates of, countries in the world where much of the country's revenue comes from fossil fuel sales. And Russia is one such state. And, the petrostates tend to be corrupt. The oil revenues tend to corrupt governments and lead to an elite, whether it's in Russia or any number of other countries. And to be honest, the oil and gas also has a corrosive effect on US politics and Canadian politics. There's a great book by a professor, Professor Doshuk of Notre Dame University, University of Notre Dame, called Anointed with Oil, Crude in Christianity in Modern America, and where he talks about the connection between religion and oil exploitation. So that there's, and with Ukraine, I wrote a blog post a few weeks ago in the Times of Israel about the nuclear reactors and the threat of a nuclear accident. And one would think that when operating next to Europe's largest nuclear power plant, it actually has 6 reactors, that the Russian military would exercise extreme caution. But that wasn't the case last week. And, in terms of Russian forces on nuclear alert, I mean, I feel like these are times that our ancestors have been dreaming about for thousands of years, where everything hangs in the balance. And I'm grateful to have organized an interfaith letter to Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church. It was signed by 150 global religious leaders that we sent to him late last week. And today we issued a press release about it, and it was picked up by a few news agencies. So, there's also a connection in this war. It's not just about oil, it's also about religion and nationalist religion. And militant religion. And so there's, there's all of the baggage of humanity is sort of coming to bear right now.
And all of these crises are interconnected, right? The more you dig around, the more you realize that it's not like we're dealing with all these separate crises. They're all kind of interrelated.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And, the legacy of the Chernobyl explosion in 1986, and the fact that at the beginning of the first day of the conflict, there was a pitched battle outside of the sarcophagus, the containment structure on Chernobyl. Yeah, and hydroelectric dams. There's, the ecological impact of this, of the lead from the bombs and the bullets and the anti-tank missiles. The lead poisons birds. There's a whole the news only reports on the number of human casualties, which are many and tragic, and especially of the children and civilians. But there's also animals and trees that, in one picture of a suburb outside of Kiev, it looked like a wasteland of, essentially everything blown up. And, the last time the Russians were in a significant conflict was in the mid 90s in Chechnya, in Grozny. And Grozny was a city of 600,000 people. And by the time the Russians finished there, it was flattened. So it's we have a lot of praying to do at this moment. It's as Pope Francis talks about, it's time for deep prayer, but also action, doing everything in our power to promote peace and understanding in this world.
Absolutely. Joining you in that posture of prayer and action, for sure. This would be a good time to mention that if you who are listening today have a question of your own, I would invite you to pop it in the chat box. You can either post it publicly to everyone, or you can send it privately to either Aram Mitchell or Ash Temin, whom you will see in the menu there. We're hoping that there'll be a time to draw in some of the questions that may be on your heart and mind today as well. Well, so many challenges, and as you say, there is a role for religious leaders, for people of faith to play in this moment, and it's desperately needed if we're going to address the big crises that are facing our world today. So I wonder if you might talk a little bit about Eco Bible, how you came to take on this project, how you approached it, and maybe your hope for it, how it might be used, how it might contribute in a positive way to the kind of change that you're longing for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this book, volume 1 is on Genesis and Exodus, volume 2 is on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's sort of an outgrowth of my thinking and research over the past number of years. It's an ecological commentary on the Pentateuch, on about 400 verses, and we've distributed it to several hundred Christian clergy and rabbis and theological school professors and deans. We've also been working with Reverend Dr. Leah Shade, who's a professor at Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky. And over the past 9 months, we've been collaborating with her to develop Christian preaching resources based on Eco Bible, and also based on an ecological reading of the Book of Psalms by Professor Bill Brown, who's a Presbyterian pastor and professor at Columbia Theological Seminary in Georgia. So the vision of the book is, a lot of faith adherents think that religion is one thing and ecology is another thing, and never do the two meet. And so what we've done is we've sort of distilled in this 2-volume book rabbinic wisdom from the past several thousand years that relates to ecological sustainability in commenting on verses of the Bible. And so for those who say that religion has nothing to do with ecology, well, then they can argue with the heavy hitters, at least in the Jewish tradition from the past thousands of years, including Maimonides, Rabbi Cook, the first chief rabbi of Pre-State Israel, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and hopefully that these Christian preaching resources that Reverend Shade has been developing are helping Christian preachers, pastors, and priests to speak about this based on the weekly lectionary readings.
Yeah, thank you. And this might be a good time to mention that we are planning right now for an Eco Preachers Workshop. The date is May 19th, not too far off. where you and Reverend Dr. Leah Shade will be presenting and kind of providing an overview of just what you're describing here. And then flowing from that, we are envisioning an eco preachers kind of cohort that would meet on an ongoing basis for people who really want to work on their craft of preaching and drawing in themes of ecology. So I'm gonna plant that seed. I see that Aram has just put in the chat an interest form. So we'll talk more about this at the end, but if you're interested in being a part of this Eco Preachers Workshop, or think you might be interested, this is just an interest form. You're not registering yet, but we'll reach out to you when the registration is live if that interests you. I noticed a question that that George is offering in the chat, and this might be a good time to go right there because he's bringing up kind of Genesis 1:26 to 28, I think. You know, this idea of dominion, and am I right that the Hebrew word is radah? Is that right?
That's correct.
I only know that because I've just written a paper about that. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. But anyway, he's asking about the distinction, I think, between stewardship and dominion. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I wonder if you could reflect a little bit about how you think about that passage where God, as recorded in that first creation story in Genesis, really does assign dominion to human beings over the birds and the fish and all living things. How do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, Genesis chapter 26 and chapter 1, verse 26 and 28 are really key in terms of eco-theology in the Bible. On the surface, the words seem to give people license to degrade and subdue the earth. But the rabbis over the millennium don't understand it that way. Verse 26 uses, they shall rule, the year do, the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth. And verse 28 uses a command form of uradu, that rule over the fish and the birds and the animals. And the rabbis understand this in a midrash, which was written about 1500 years ago, that there's a play of words here in the Hebrew, because the word to rule is the same root as the word to be taken down. So Rabbi Hanina, who was an ancient rabbi, interpreted the midrash to say, if humankind is worthy, God says, you rule, uradu. While if humankind is not worthy, God says, yeradu, the human being shall be taken down, or let others, the animals, rule over people. And so this understanding is that if we act in the image and likeness of God, which is also mentioned in one of these verses, then we are given the privilege of being a spiritually enlightened being that cares for all of creation and acts in a sustainable and spiritually aware way. But if we act at our lowest level of soul awareness and create a consumer society that is, you know, focused on donuts and fried chicken and God knows what else,
domination, extraction, consumption, right? Yeah.
And if we put 80 billion animals in factory farms, if we have, you know, a quarter of the internet downloads be pornographic, all of these indicators of something that's off in humanity, then humanity will be taken down by the animals. And the coronavirus is an example of that. The coronavirus that emerged from an animal market, and that all of a sudden we can't even see this virus, but it is having an effect, a tremendous effect on billions of people.
Yeah, that's a really helpful corrective. There are many people who have suggested that the ways in which particularly white Western Christians have misinterpreted and misapplied that that verse, Genesis 1:26 and 28, holds a good bit of responsibility for the ways in which we have related to the planet, as if it gives human beings permission to do whatever we want, you know, to extract every little bit of resource from the planet and consume, which even without the interpretation that you've just provided, which I love, misses the mark, because even a kind of straight reading of dominion doesn't necessarily imply, I think, whether that is a benevolent ruling or a malevolent ruling, if you know what I mean. So yeah, thank you, George, for asking that question. You're not the first to ask. Is there another passage from the Torah that you'd like to kind of help to reinterpret, like you just did for that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about Genesis chapter 14, verse 10. For those of you who have your Bibles in front of you, then this can be a little Bible study together. And the verse says, "Now the valley of Siddim was dotted with bitumen pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah in their flight threw themselves into the pits, while the rest escaped to the hill country." And this is actually an example where sometimes people need an English dictionary to understand the words of the Bible, which are translated. The word in Hebrew is chemar, which the ancient rabbis understood to be referring to bitumen, which is a viscous liquid that's a fossil fuel. It's that in ancient times, as of today, there are surface seepages of this thick, sticky form of crude oil, and it actually occurs in a number of places. The first oil well was made on the Allegheny River in Pennsylvania in 1859. John Wilkes Booth was one of the first miners, and that was because there was a seepage of bitumen or of a tar-like oil substance into the water and onto the land, and so too in the Dead Sea. That was the case. And so the Bible is referring to the war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, and how the kings from Babylonia vanquished the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah at the Dead Sea. And those kings fled and hid in bitumen pits, in these big, sort of, you think of like a big vat, but it's like naturally occurring. And they fell into them. And according to the Midrash, the Jewish oral tradition, the kings weren't able to get out of the pits themselves once they went into there. And Abraham came, and Abraham pulled these kings out of the bitumen pits, because he then had a conversation the Bible records between him and the kings. They actually asked for they asked for the captive Lot. He said, "Don't worry, I want to keep Lot, but you can have your wealth back. I'm not interested in your wealth." These were materialistic societies that God destroyed afterwards. And I think there's a deep metaphor here of Abraham, the prophet of light, pulling these materialistic kings out of fossil fuels. And I think it's a metaphor for our time that, as I said earlier, we haven't been able to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels in the past 150 years. And it was actually in 1896 that a Swedish chemist, Arrhenius, came up with a theory of climate change. So we've known for over 120 years about this issue with burning fossil fuels. And what we need is spirituality. We need the light of spirituality to show us a new path that will help us to end our addiction to fossil fuels.
Yeah, amen. Thank you. I think it's always a rich experience to hear the wisdom, the ancient wisdom that can be applied to contemporary readings of the text. And I think Christians are really guilty of taking an English interpretation of a text from Hebrew or Greek. Somebody's interpreted it in a certain way, and then just reading it in a very kind of flat way. And there's always so much depth. So thank you for opening that up for us. I'm going to ask just one more question, and then I'm going to ask Ash and Aram if they're seeing some questions in the chat that they'd like to draw in. So this question is about hope. I find that people often want to talk about hope. How can we be hopeful in a world of accelerating climate devastation? And I think, sometimes we conflate or confuse hope and optimism as if they're the same thing, which they aren't. So I wonder how you think about hope. What word would you have for us today?
Yeah, so I'd actually like to share a teaching from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, who is the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth. He wrote, "Hope is a human virtue, but one with religious underpinnings. At its ultimate, it is the belief that God is mindful of our aspirations, with us in our fumbling efforts, that God has given us the means to save us from ourselves, that we are not wrong to dream, wish, and work for a better world. Hope is the knowledge that we can choose, that we can learn from our mistakes and act differently next time. Sometimes people say, well, it's all lost. We've already passed the tipping point. There's nothing we can do in terms of our ecological challenges. And there's other people who say, well, there's not even a problem. There's no such thing as climate change. I'm of the belief that we're probably near a tipping point, and every day counts, every year counts, everything we do counts. Each of us has power, whether it's in terms of what we consume, whether we consume sustainably, whether we empower sustainable producers, how we donate philanthropically, what type of messages, whether we bring the world positive energy. And so my hope is that people can use the power that we have to change course. It's something that's true of the conflict in Russia, and I think it's true of our ecological reality as well.
Yeah, thank you. I share that hope. Aram, I wonder if you would unmute and tell us what you're seeing in the chat, whether there's a question that you might want to pose, either your own or, whoops, we added you in and then took you out. There you go.
Certainly. Yeah, I have a question, and your response, Yonatan, may be comparable to what you just shared in terms of your response about hope. But we're offering a course right now at the BTS Center exploring the knowledge, skills, mindsets, and practices that we need to really build a robust culture of spiritual leadership in a climate changed world. And one of the questions that I find comes up is kind of about the tension between the systemic nature of the climate crisis and our personal, like individual personal complicity and sort of like our ability to respond. In the excerpt that Alan shared from the Eco Bible earlier, you spoke of behavioral change and transformational change kind of in that same segment. And I wonder if you might just speak a bit to the relationship between behavioral change, which I at least interpret in part as a personal and communal endeavor, and kind of the transformational change that's required given the systemic situation. What did you say? All the baggage of humanity is coming to bear right now. You said that a little bit ago. But can you speak to those two things, the idea of behavioral change and transformational change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in the importance of individual action and community action. At the end of the day, our power lies mostly in ourselves. God is within, and we have the ability to access that power. It can be in terms of how much we chew our food and what type of food we put in our mouth. And it can also be in, with sort of different spheres of influence, expanding our spheres of influence to our communities, to our faith community, helping to transform our faith communities into ecological leaders. So I see behavioral change as starting at a smaller scale, but then rippling outward into systemic change. And I believe that, religion is key. 85% of people in the world identify with a religion. It's the biggest NGO in the world. Religious institutions have huge land holdings, educational institutions, media outlets. And yet it's sort of been on the sidelines in terms of ecological action and inspiring behavioral change. I mean, how often do clergy in America on average preach on this topic? Not so often. So there's a lot of work to be done. And one other thing in our power is that if we go to a congregation where the clergy member doesn't really take religion and ecology seriously, as a congregant, we can say to that person, we can say to the clergy member, I want to hear about this topic. This is important to me, and I'd like to hear more from you on this topic.
There's a great invitation, isn't there? Yeah, thank you for your response. And thank you, Aram, for the question. And that's also a great invitation to take part in the Eco Preachers Workshop and cohort that we are envisioning. So I think we're going to move into that and then invite you to offer a blessing. But I know there are some other questions that are coming up in the chat, and Rabbi Neril has graciously agreed to stay beyond the 1 o'clock hour. We'll stop recording and stop streaming to Facebook, but if any of you want to linger, we'll just engage in some open Q&A and hopefully a chance to engage some of the comments and questions that are coming up in the chat. But again, we are so looking forward to having you back for this Eco Preacher Workshop on Thursday, May 19th. It's going to be from 12:30 to 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So it's going to be a late one for you, Yonatan, 7:30 p.m. to, what is that, 10 p.m., I think. Thank you for saying yes to that. So kind of a midday afternoon workshop, and then following that up with a cohort for people who really want to work on their craft and dig into the lectionary texts and think about how they pull these themes into their preaching. Aram is gonna, let's see, Aram, did you put that one in the, can you put that back in the chat again about the Eco Preachers Workshop, or Ash? And then I wonder, Ash, if you could tell us a little bit about the couple of retreats that are coming up.
I have to unmute myself first.
Yes, please.
We have a couple of day-long retreats coming up, which we would love for you to join us for. The first is called Creating a New Story, the Role of Imagination and Place in Addressing Our Collective Future. That's happening on Thursday, March 24th, so just over 2 weeks from now. And it will be guided by Reverend Allison Cornish and Reverend Maria Anderson Lippert. I think Aram is dropping that in the chat right now. So it's a day-long retreat. It'll take place from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then we have another day-long retreat called Shining in the Shadows, Leading with Hope in a Time of Despair, which is a retreat with the Reverend Steve Garnis Holmes. Some of you might have come to the Fireside Chat that Alan had with Steve back in December, I believe. So Steve will be returning to lead this day-long retreat. That's also from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and that one will be on Thursday, April 7th. So if you have interest in those, you can click on the links in the chat. They're also on our website, and we would love to have you join us for those.
Great, thank you, Ash. And really quickly, Aram, can you tell us about this coming up on March 24th?
Yes, so we're also looking forward to an online screening of the film Truth Tellers, which is a documentary film about Maine artist and activist Robert Shetterly and his project Americans Who Tell the Truth, followed by a live Q&A with the artist Rob Shetterly, along with Penobscot Tribal Ambassador Malian Dana and musician activist Reggie Harris. This is coming up on Thursday, March 24th in the evening, and Ash is sharing the link in the chat for more information and to register for that.
Thank you, Aram, and thank you, Ash. So yeah, some great ways to be engaged. As I mentioned, Rabbi Neril has agreed to stick around for some Q&A, informal conversation, so feel free to stay if you'd like, or go if you must. But first, I wonder, Yonatan, would you be willing to offer a blessing?
Yes, I'd like to bless us to access the well springs of spiritual wisdom in our traditions, and to dig deep into those traditions and to reveal that wisdom for our generation, for the next generation, so that future generations of people and of all creatures can inherit a spiritually aware, thriving, and sustainable planet for many generations to come.
Amen. Thank you. And to those of you who are gathered, if you affirm that blessing, I invite you just to make a sign of agreement, of oneness as we hold that blessing. We're out of time for today, but let me say again, thank you, Yonatan, for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for Eco Bible. Thank you for the work you're doing to draw people of many different faith traditions together to make connections between religion and ecology, and to mobilize faith communities to act. Really grateful for this time together. And thank you to all of you who've joined us. We're going to stop the recording here and end the Facebook Live feed, but we'll keep the Zoom meeting open for a bit for those who want to stay for some conversations with Yonatan. So go in peace if you wish, or feel free to linger for some conversation.